The night was heavy with silence when Amara, clutching her baby, stood in the rain outside the very house she once called home, thrown out by the man who swore to love her forever. He had chosen another woman, chasing status and empty promises. But fate has a long memory. Years later, their paths would cross again. And what unfolded left an entire community in shock. Was it justice, karma, or something even deeper? This is not just a story of betrayal. It's a journey of resilience, dignity, and the price of choices. Before we continue, please kindly tell us where you are watching from in the comment section, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and subscribe. Bup Stories for more stories like this. The morning sun spilled across the small apartment, filling the room with golden light that made even the faded curtains look warm and alive. A soft breeze drifted in from the cracked window, carrying with it the faint scent of fried plantains from the neighbor's kitchen. Inside, Amara swayed gently on her feet, rocking her baby boy in her arms. His tiny fingers clutched the collar of her cotton dress as his eyelids fluttered, still heavy with sleep. She hummed a lullaby, an old Jamaican folk tune her mother had sung to her as a child. The rhythm was steady, soothing, almost like the ocean waves back home. This was her world now: quiet mornings, baby giggles, the smell of milk, and the sound of lullabies. Some might have called it small, but to Amara, it was life itself. Her little boy Nathaniel was the heartbeat in her chest. She could still remember the first time she held him, the weight of him against her chest, the tiny cries that filled the hospital room. In that moment, she promised him everything she had: her love, her strength, her future. Amara was a Jamaican woman through and through, her skin a rich brown, her dark curls often wrapped in colorful scarves, her accent melodic and strong. She carried the culture of her homeland everywhere she went. The food she cooked filled the home with flavor: rice and peas simmered with coconut milk, jerk chicken marinated with spice, fried dumplings golden and soft. On Sundays, she played reggae records while she cleaned, singing along as Nathaniel gurgled and kicked his legs on a blanket. And on her hardest days, she knelt at the side of her bed, whispering prayers the way her grandmother had taught her. To the outside world, her life might have looked modest, but Amara knew wealth wasn't always measured in money. It was in laughter, in family, in the way a child's smile could erase the heaviest sorrow. But she was not raising Nathaniel alone. Her husband David was there, at least in body, if not always in spirit. David was a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper ambition. He carried himself with a kind of confidence that drew people in. At church, he shook hands firmly, flashing a smile that made others nod in approval. At work, his colleagues admired his drive, his hunger to climb higher, faster. When Amara first met him years ago, that same confidence had swept her off her feet. He was the kind of man who made promises sound like certainties, who painted pictures of the future so vividly that you believed every stroke of it. He told her she was his queen, that they would build an empire together, that their children would live better than they ever had. And for a while, Amara believed every word. In the early days of their marriage, things had been sweet. They laughed often, cooked together, and dreamed aloud about their future home, future business, future travels. But as time passed, Amara noticed that the dreaming never stopped. David always wanted more: a bigger apartment, a better car, more recognition. She admired his ambition, but sometimes it left her feeling like she wasn't enough. Like the life they already had, the home filled with music and the baby they had prayed for, was just a stepping stone for him, never the destination. One evening, after a long day of caring for Nathaniel, Amara cooked David's favorite meal, curried goat with rice and peas. She set the table carefully, lighting a small candle to make the evening feel special. Nathaniel slept soundly in his crib as she waited. David came home late, his tie loosened, his expression distracted. "Smells good," he muttered, kissing her on the cheek without really looking at her. They sat down to eat, but instead of savoring the meal, David scrolled through his phone between bites. "David," Amara said softly, trying to keep her voice light, "how was work today?" "Busy," he replied, not looking up. "I need to find a way to get promoted faster. I can't keep doing the same thing year after year. I deserve more." Amara hesitated. "We're blessed, David. Look at our son, our home. Isn't this already more than blessed?" He cut her off, his tone sharper than he intended. "Amara, we're barely getting by. You wouldn't understand. You don't see how men like me are expected to succeed. No one respects a man who stays at the bottom." The words stung, though she kept her face calm. She didn't want an argument. She just wanted him to see what she saw, that success wasn't only measured in money or status, but she swallowed her words and simply nodded, though her heart ached. As Nathaniel stirred softly in his crib, Amara got up to soothe him, humming again, her back turned so David wouldn't see the tears in her eyes. That night, lying in bed, she studied her husband's face in the dim light. He was handsome, yes, and she loved him deeply. But there was a hunger in him, a restlessness that no meal, no home, no child seemed able to satisfy. And though Amara didn't know it yet, that hunger would soon lead him toward a path that would break their family apart. Still, in those quiet early days, Amara clung to hope. She believed love could steady him. She believed their child could remind him of what truly mattered. She believed, because what else could she do? Life went on. The mornings came with laughter and baby cries, the afternoons with chores and meals, the evenings with prayers whispered under her breath. Amara carried the weight of their little family with grace, always smiling, always giving. But in the corners of their life, tiny cracks were forming, cracks that only she seemed to notice. David was coming home later and later, his excuses vague. Meetings, he said. Networking. Sometimes she smelled faint traces of perfume that wasn't hers. Other times he seemed lost in thought, staring past her even when she was speaking directly to him. She tried to push the doubts away, to trust him, to hold their family together. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet unease began to take root. Amara had no idea how much her life was about to change. No idea that those tiny cracks were the beginning of something much larger. Something that would soon shatter everything she had built. For now she held her baby close, kissed his forehead, and whispered a promise into the soft curls on his head. No matter what happens, Mommy's here. Mommy will always be here. Her words were full of love, but they would soon be tested in ways she could never have imagined. David's footsteps echoed through the narrow hallway as he entered. Their apartment late again. Amara, who had been pacing the floor with Nathaniel in her arms, looked up at him with weary eyes. The clock on the wall showed almost 11 p.m. David, she said quietly, the baby's been fussing all evening. He wanted to see you before he slept. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. Amara, I told you, I had another meeting. These things take time if I want to get anywhere. Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. She handed him a plate of food she'd kept warm. He sat down, ate in silence, and pulled out his phone, scrolling as though she wasn't there. This had become a pattern. The man who once came home with flowers or laughter now carried tension in his shoulders and irritation in his voice. One Saturday afternoon, when Amara suggested they take Nathaniel to the park, David shook his head. I don't have time for that right now. Do you know how much I'm competing with men who have degrees, who drive better cars, who live in neighborhoods people actually admire? And you want me to sit in a park? His words landed like blows. Amara bit her lip, trying not to show the sting. David, Nathaniel doesn't care about cars or degrees. He just wants his father, and I just want my husband. David threw his hands up. You don't understand, Amara. You don't see the pressure I'm under. I'm not going to be stuck in this small life forever. The phrase, small life, began to haunt her. Whenever she suggested family time, he called it a distraction. When she reminded him of their blessings, he called her ungrateful for not pushing him harder. It wasn't that he didn't love her or their child, at least not openly, but it was clear something else mattered more to him. Recognition, success, status. At church, he would linger after service, shaking hands, laughing loudly, making sure everyone saw him as the man on the rise. At work functions, he told stories about the deals he was chasing, exaggerating his role so others would be impressed. Amara saw it all, the way his chest swelled with pride. When someone called him sharp or driven, yet at home, that pride turned into distance, sometimes even contempt. One evening, Amara decided to speak her heart. After dinner, she sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. David, she began carefully, I need to tell you something. I feel like I'm losing you. Nathaniel needs you. I need you. This ambition of yours, it's pulling you away from us. David leaned back, arms crossed, his expression hard. So now my ambition is the problem? Amara, you should be thanking me. Everything I'm doing is for this family. Her voice trembled. But what's the point of all the success if we lose each other in the process? His jaw tightened. That's the difference between you and me. You're content with crumbs, but I want the whole cake. I won't apologize for that. The words cut her deeply. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. She turned her face away, focusing on the soft breaths of their sleeping son. From that night on, arguments became sharper, more frequent. When the rent was due, and Amara suggested they save by cutting down on certain luxuries, David snapped, "Do you want people to think I can't provide for my own family? Do you want them to laugh at me?" When she asked why he was always distracted, he shot back, "Because I'm trying to build a life worth living, Amara. Not just sitting around cooking and singing lullabies." Every insult, every dismissive word chipped away at her heart. Yet she stayed calm, for the baby's sake, for her vows, for the hope that maybe the man she fell in love with still lived inside him somewhere. But David was slipping further into the grip of his pride. He began to buy things they couldn't afford. A watch that gleamed on his wrist, shoes polished so well they reflected light. Dinners at fancy restaurants with colleagues she never met. Amara tried to reason with him. "David, we can't keep living like this. Nathaniel needs stability, not show." David scoffed. "People respect what they see, Amara. You think anyone cares about what's inside? They look at the car you drive, the clothes you wear, the places you're seen. That's what matters in this world." It was in moments like these that Amara saw his vulnerability, not in tenderness, but in desperation. His obsession with image and status wasn't just arrogance, it was insecurity. He feared being overlooked, being judged as ordinary. And that fear was a weakness waiting to be exploited. Late at night, when Amara lay awake listening to the baby's soft breaths, she would glance at David beside her, scrolling endlessly through his phone. Messages pinged. Sometimes he would smirk at the screen. Other times his fingers moved quickly, as though he was hiding something. She wanted to ask. The words sat heavy on her tongue, but each time she opened her mouth, fear held her back. Fear of what she might hear, fear of confirming the unease already growing inside her. One Sunday after church, as they walked home, a neighbor greeted David warmly. "Man like you, going places, I can see it." David grinned, shaking the man's hand with both of his. Amara noticed the way his eyes lit up, the way he walked a little taller afterward. She couldn't help but wonder, was her love not enough? Was her sacrifice invisible? The tension between them grew like a storm cloud, always there, heavy and dark, threatening to break open. One evening, after another argument about money and priorities, David stormed out of the house. He didn't return until well after midnight. Amara sat in the dim light of the kitchen, rocking Nathaniel, her mind racing. When David finally walked in, his shirt smelled faintly of perfume, a scent she didn't recognize. "Where were you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He paused, then shrugged. "Out, thinking. Don't start with your questions, Amara. Not tonight." She wanted to press him, but something in his tone warned her not to. Instead, she swallowed the knot in her throat and turned away. That night, as she lay in bed with her baby curled beside her, Amara knew the cracks in their marriage were no longer small. They were widening, slowly but surely, and she feared they would soon split wide open. And though she couldn't yet see it, temptation was already circling her husband, whispering promises of admiration and escape. David's pride and hunger for more had opened a door, and soon, someone else would walk through it. It happened on an ordinary weekday. David was attending a company mixer, a networking event he insisted was vital for his career. He dressed sharply, his watch gleaming under the dim lights of the upscale bar. Amara stayed home with Nathaniel, too exhausted to argue. The room buzzed with chatter, laughter, and clinking glasses. David thrived in spaces like these, where image and status were currency. And that's when he noticed her, Sabrina. She stood near the bar, a glass of red wine in her hand, her laughter soft but magnetic. Her dress was elegant without being loud, her makeup subtle but striking. There was something about her presence mysterious, confident, alluring that pulled David's eyes again and again. Their first conversation was brief, casual. She complimented his tie, teased that most men at events like this dressed like they were attending funerals. He laughed, charmed by her boldness. She introduced herself as a consultant, someone who helped ambitious men reach their next level. That phrase stuck with him. Ambitious men. Next level. It was as though she had peered straight into his soul. Over the next weeks, David found himself running into her again, at another event, then at a cafe near his office. Each time, Sabrina greeted him warmly, her eyes locking onto his as though he were the only man in the room. She flattered him, told him he had the look of a leader, that he deserved more than what the world was giving him. No one else spoke to him like that. Not Amara, who begged him to slow down, to be present. Not his colleagues, who competed with him. Sabrina's words fed the hunger inside him. Meanwhile, back at home, Amara felt the shift. David came home later, his excuses thinner. He guarded his phone, stepping out to take calls in hushed tones. He wore new cologne she hadn't seen him buy, and when she asked, he brushed it off, a gift from a colleague. Amara tried to convince herself it was nothing. She wanted to trust her husband, wanted to believe the man she married would not betray her. But late at night, as she rocked Nathaniel to sleep, Unease coiled in her chest. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she found a receipt in David's pocket from a high-end restaurant they had never visited together. The bill was for two. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. Questions flooded her mind. But when David returned that evening, she said nothing. Confrontation could wait. Tonight she needed peace for her child. She tucked the receipt away, her silence heavy with fear. Nathaniel became her anchor. When David grew distant, she poured her love into the baby. She whispered to him about God's faithfulness, about love that never abandons. Holding him reminded her she was not alone, even as her marriage began to feel like sand slipping through her fingers. But the distance grew. David began comparing her to others, subtle at first, then sharper. "You've let yourself go since the baby," he muttered once, his words cold as steel. Or, "Why can't you be more supportive, like other wives I see?" Amara's chest burned with pain, but she bit her tongue, knowing that responding would only lead to another argument. The truth was, David was falling deeper under Sabrina's spell. She knew exactly what to say, how to look at him, when to laugh at his jokes. Where Amara reminded him of responsibilities, Sabrina made him feel limitless. Where Amara questioned his choices, Sabrina praised them. It was a dangerous dance, and David was already too close to the fire. One night, Amara awoke to find David's side of the bed empty. She padded softly into the living room and saw him on the couch, phone in hand, grinning at something on the screen. "David?" she whispered. He startled, quickly locking the phone. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. She wanted to ask who he had been smiling at. She wanted to demand answers, but fear and love tied her tongue. She returned to bed, clutching Nathaniel, tears soaking the pillow. The audience can almost feel her pain, the unfairness, how she sacrificed, how she endured, while David drifted further away. Days later, the storm broke wider. David came home smelling not just of cologne, but faint traces of perfume. Not Amara's scent, something floral, expensive, unfamiliar. Amara's heart raced. She said nothing, but her eyes searched his face for truth. He avoided her gaze, brushing past her, muttering about being tired. Suspense was building like thunder in the distance. Even if Amara didn't yet know the full truth, the audience did. Betrayal was looming, and then came the moment, the choice that would shatter everything. It was late evening. Amara had prepared dinner, Nathaniel babbling happily in his high chair. The table was set, candles lit. She waited for David, hope clinging to her heart. The clock ticked. Minutes stretched into hours. She fed Nathaniel alone, rocking him to sleep afterward. The food grew cold. The candle burned out. Finally, at nearly midnight, David walked in. His shirt was rumpled, his hair tousled, and though he tried to mask it, the faintest trace of lipstick stained his collar. Amara froze, her heart pounding. She didn't need to ask where he had been. The truth was painted across his body. David opened his mouth to speak, but the silence between them was louder than any words. This was the night he chose. The night he stepped across the line that could never be uncrossed. And from that choice, every piece of their lives would begin to crumble. The moment lingered in the air like smoke. Amara's eyes fixed on the faint lipstick stain on David's collar. She tried to steady her breath, her chest rising and falling as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what is this?" He looked down quickly, then away, as if pretending not to see what she was pointing at. "What's what?" he muttered, dropping his keys onto the counter with forced calm. "Don't play with me," Amara said, her voice sharper now. "That stain on your shirt, it's not mine." "Don't lie to me, David." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall. Each sound seemed louder than his refusal to answer. Finally, he exhaled, his face tightening into a mask of irritation. "You're imagining things, Amara. Always imagining things." Her eyes widened. "Imagining? Do you take me for a fool? You come home late every night smelling of perfume, receipts in your pockets for dinners I never had with you, and now lipstick on your shirt." "David, don't insult me." Something shifted in his eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, anger. "So what, Amara? You go through my things now? You think you're my warden?" Her heart pounded. "I'm your wife. I have every right to ask where you've been, who you've been with. Don't twist this on me." He slammed his fist against the table, making the plates rattle. "This is exactly why I don't come home anymore. You nag, you accuse, you smother me. Maybe if you were the kind of wife who inspired a man, who lifted him up instead of weighing him down, I wouldn't need to look elsewhere." The word struck her like a physical blow. Amara staggered back. one hand gripping the counter for balance. "Need to look elsewhere?" she whispered, her throat tight. David's chest heaved, his eyes cold. He had said too much, but he didn't back down. Instead, he leaned into the cruelty. "Do you think I want to come home to this?" He gestured toward the small apartment, the toys scattered on the floor, the dishes drying on the rack. "This ordinary life? I deserve better. I deserve more." Tears blurred Amara's vision. She thought of the meals she cooked, the nights she stayed awake with their son so David could sleep, the dreams she sacrificed so he could chase his. And still, she wasn't enough. "You made vows, David," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "You promised before God and everyone who witnessed that you would love me, honor me, cherish me. Did those words mean nothing to you?" For a flicker of a second, something wavered in his expression, but then his pride surged higher. "Don't preach to me, Amara. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under. You're content with this small life. But me, I need more. And if you can't give it to me, someone else will." Her stomach dropped, nausea rising. "Sabrina," she said softly, the name falling from her lips like poison. David froze. His silence was louder than any admission. Amara clutched her chest, gasping as though the air itself had betrayed her. "How long?" she whispered. He looked away. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she cried, her voice breaking. "It matters because while I've been here raising your son, praying for you, sacrificing for us, you've been giving your love to someone else. It matters because you've broken our home." Nathaniel stirred in his crib, his small cries piercing the air like daggers. Amara rushed to lift him, holding him against her chest as tears streamed down her face. The baby's warmth grounded her, even as her world spun out of control. David's jaw clenched as he watched her. Instead of softening, he hardened.
"You always do this," he spat.
"Play the victim. Run to the baby like that proves something. But tell me, Amara, what have you done for me lately? What have you done to make me feel alive?" Her voice cracked with disbelief. "I've given you everything, David. My youth, my body, my faith, my trust. I bore your child. I carried you in prayer when you were too weak to carry yourself. And you dare ask me that?" His face twisted with contempt. "You're holding me back. That's the truth. Sabrina sees my potential. She believes in me. She makes me feel like the man I was meant to be. You only remind me of my failures." Amara staggered back, clutching Nathaniel tighter, her tears falling onto his tiny head. "You're leaving me for her?" she asked, barely able to force the words through her trembling lips. David's eyes hardened into stone. "I'm choosing my future. And if you can't handle that, then maybe you don't belong in it." Her knees nearly buckled. "David, please, don't do this. Think of Nathaniel. He needs his father." David's voice dropped, cold and final. "No, he needs a father who can give him more than this. More than what you can offer." The injustice burned. The man who should have protected her was casting her aside. The father who should have cherished his son was discarding him like baggage. Amara's voice rose with desperate fury. "You will regret this, David. One day, the very things you're chasing will destroy you. And when that day comes, you'll remember the woman who stood by you when no one else did." But her words did not pierce his pride. With a sneer, David pointed to the door. "Get out." The world seemed to freeze. "What?" "You heard me," he growled. "Take your things and go. You and the baby, tonight." Her heart stopped. "David, it's midnight."
Where would I even...
"Not my problem," he snapped. "You wanted this confrontation, and now you have your answer. I'm done. You're nothing but dead weight." Amara's knees weakened, but she stood tall, clutching her child. "You would throw your wife and baby out into the night for her?" David's voice was sharp, merciless. "Yes." The words shattered her. Her hands shook as she grabbed the baby bag, stuffing diapers and a few clothes inside with trembling fingers. Nathaniel whimpered, sensing her distress. She pressed kisses against his cheeks, whispering through tears, "It's all right, my love. Mommy's here. Mommy won't let anything happen to you." As she reached for the door, she looked back one last time. David stood in the living room, his face unreadable, his eyes already distant, as though she were a stranger. "God sees you, David," she said softly, her voice broken but resolute. "And he is not mocked. One day you'll reap what you've sown." But he said nothing. He didn't move. The door clicked shut behind her, and just like that, Amara's life was torn in two. The night air was cold, biting against her tear-streaked face. She clutched Nathaniel close, wrapping her shawl tighter around him. The street was empty, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Injustice burned like fire in her chest. Anger at David, sorrow for her child, fear for the uncertain road ahead. But beneath it all, a flicker of something else glowed faintly. Determination. She would not let this betrayal destroy her. She would not let her baby suffer because of one man's pride. Still, the audience can't help but rage. The cruelty, the injustice. A wife and infant cast into the night. while the man who vowed to protect them chose another woman instead. The stage was set. The storm had broken, and Amara's fight for survival was only beginning. The night pressed in like a heavy cloak, the air sharp with dampness. Amara adjusted the thin shawl around Nathaniel, her fingers trembling as she whispered lullabies into his tiny ear. Each note cracked with grief, yet she sang anyway, because silence would have felt like surrender. The street stretched before her, empty and endless, lit only by the weak glow of flickering lamps. Every step away from that door felt like walking barefoot over shards of glass. Her heart was bleeding, but she forced herself forward. She had to. Nathaniel's whimpers grew quieter against her chest, soothed by the rhythm of her heartbeat. That small sound, his fragile breathing, was the only thread tethering her to sanity. Memories assaulted her. David's smile on their wedding day, his trembling hand as he slid the ring onto her finger, the way he whispered, "Forever, Amara," the way she believed him. That word echoed now like mockery. Forever had lasted only until ambition whispered sweeter promises into his ear. She paused under a street lamp, her tears catching the pale light. For a moment, she wanted to collapse right there on the sidewalk, to let the grief swallow her whole. But then Nathaniel stirred, his tiny fingers curling around her blouse. His trust, so pure, burned away her weakness. She straightened her spine. "God, give me strength," she whispered, lifting her gaze toward the heavens. Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath it. "If the man who swore to protect me has cast me aside, then you must be my shield. You must be my son's father now." Far behind her, the house loomed in shadow. She imagined David inside, already pouring a glass of whiskey, already sending a message to Sabrina. The thought seared her, but she refused to turn back. If she looked over her shoulder, she feared she would shatter completely. Her feet carried her forward, block after block, though she had no destination. Only survival. Only the next breath, the next step. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked and a car sped past, splashing through puddles, its driver oblivious to the young mother cradling her child in the dark. The city was vast, uncaring. Yet in that vastness, Amara whispered to herself a vow. "I will rise from this, for Nathaniel, for myself. I will not let David's betrayal write the ending of my story." She kissed the crown of her baby's head, inhaling the sweet, milky scent that reminded her why she must endure. Nathaniel whimpered again, and Amara adjusted him carefully, her steps steadying with new resolve. The night was cold, cruel, but inside her, a fire had been lit. It was the fire of survival. And though she could not yet see it, though her heart was still torn and bleeding, this was the moment where Amara's true journey began. The breaking of her home was not the end, it was the seed of a story that would one day shock everyone who had ever doubted her worth. The street was nearly empty, the air sharp with the chill of midnight. Amara clutched Nathaniel close to her chest, his small body pressed against her heart, wrapped in the thinnest blanket she had grabbed in haste. The weight of the baby was nothing compared to the crushing weight of betrayal sitting on her shoulders. Each step away from the house felt unreal, like walking out of a dream she couldn't wake from. Her heart screamed to turn back, to bang on the door and beg David to come to his senses. But pride, and the raw sting of his words, wouldn't let her. He had chosen. He had thrown her out. She had no place there anymore. As she walked, the reality sank deeper. Where would she go? At this hour, who could she call? The thought of her family back in Jamaica flashed in her mind. Her mother's warm hands, her father's voice full of wisdom. But they were thousands of miles away. Right now, she was alone, or almost alone. She looked down at Nathaniel. His little face, innocent and soft, was turned up toward her, his eyes half closed as though trusting that she would keep him safe. A tear slipped down her cheek. "You are all I have now, and I will not fail you." By dawn, Amara found herself at the doorstep of Sister Claire, a woman from her church who had once told her, "Child, my door is always open if you ever need it." Amara had never thought she'd need to take those words literally. The door creaked open after a few knocks, and Claire's eyes widened in shock. Amara? Baby, what happened to you? Why you out here with the child this time of night? Amara's lips trembled, her voice breaking. He put me out, Sister Claire. Claire's face softened, tears welling instantly. Without another word, she pulled Amara inside, wrapping her in an embrace that smelled of lavender soap and fresh bread. Come, come. You're not on the street tonight. Not while I'm breathing. For a week, Amara and Nathaniel stayed in Claire's modest home. Claire fed them, gave Amara her own bed, and rocked the baby with a grandmother's love when Amara was too weak to keep her eyes open. But Amara knew she couldn't stay forever. Pride gnawed at her. Gratitude wasn't enough to erase the shame of being dependent. She wanted to stand, to show David and herself that she could survive. Soon, she found work. It wasn't glamorous cleaning offices in the early mornings, waitressing at a Jamaican cafe in the afternoons, but it paid just enough to cover rent for a tiny studio apartment. Every day was a cycle of exhaustion. She woke before dawn, leaving Nathaniel in the care of a kind elderly neighbor who charged only a little. She cleaned floors until her back ached, the smell of bleach and dust clinging to her clothes. Then she hurried to the cafe where the sound of sizzling patties and reggae music filled the air as she smiled at customers who never guessed her heart was broken. At night, she returned home to her son, and it was only then, when she saw his gummy smile, heard his tiny laughter, that the weight of the day lifted. Nathaniel became her anchor on the hardest nights when tears threatened to drown her. She whispered to him as she rocked him to sleep, "You're my reason, baby. My reason to keep going. We may not have much, but as long as we have each other, we have everything." Still, the pain of betrayal lingered like a ghost. There were nights Amara lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying David's words, "You're holding me back. You're nothing but dead weight." The injustice gnawed at her soul. She thought of the sacrifices she had made, the meals she had skipped so David could eat, the prayers she had prayed, the loyalty she had given without question. And now, while she scrubbed toilets and carried trays, he was likely dining with Sabrina in luxury restaurants, wearing suits she had ironed, living the life she had helped him build. The sorrow was heavy, but each time she looked at Nathaniel, she knew she couldn't let it break her. One evening, after an especially long shift, Amara returned home to find Nathaniel awake, babbling in his crib. Exhaustion pressed down on her, but when she leaned over and saw his tiny arms reaching for her, her heart swelled. She lifted him into her arms, burying her face in his little neck. "You don't even know it, my love," she whispered through tears, "but you're saving me. Every single day you're saving me." The months passed, each day a battle, each night a reminder of her strength. Amara learned to budget every penny, stretching meals with rice and beans, sometimes skipping meat altogether so Nathaniel would have enough. She sold handmade crafts on weekends, woven baskets and beaded jewelry inspired by her Jamaican heritage to earn a little extra. Slowly, bit by bit, she began to build a life. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Neighbors noticed her strength. The elderly woman who babysat Nathaniel would often say, "Amara, I don't know how you do it, but you inspire me. You never give up." Amara would smile softly, though her heart still carried scars. She wasn't surviving for admiration. She was surviving for Nathaniel. One night, after a brutal double shift, Amara came home to find that the electricity had been shut off, an unpaid bill she couldn't cover in time. The room was dark and cold, the silence deafening. She sank to the floor, Nathaniel in her arms, and for the first time in months, she let herself break completely. Tears poured down her cheeks as sobs racked her body. "Lord, I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I'm so tired." Nathaniel, sensing her distress, reached up with his tiny hand and patted her cheek, babbling softly. Amara froze, staring into his innocent eyes. It was as if he was telling her, "Don't give up, Mommy. I need you." Her tears slowed. She kissed his little hand, whispering, "All right, baby. For you, I'll keep going. For you, I'll be strong." It was in that moment she realized her resilience wasn't just about survival. It was about showing her son what strength looked like. Though her faith had wavered, Amara found her way back to church. Each Sunday she carried Nathaniel to the pews, letting the hymns wash over her like balm. One Sunday, as the choir sang, "His eye is on the sparrow," Amara wept quietly. She felt God reminding her, "I see you. I see your tears. I have not forgotten you." Those words rekindled a small flame of hope. She wasn't alone, not truly. And though David had abandoned her, she believed there was a purpose in her pain. By now, the audience is gripped. They've seen Amara on the streets, in another woman's home, scrubbing floors, holding her baby in the dark. They've felt her sorrow. They've admired her strength. They're angry at David. They're disgusted with Sabrina. But they're also rooting desperately for Amara, for the mother who has been beaten down yet refuses to stay down. The suspense tightens. How long can she endure? What will happen when her path crosses David's again? And will there be justice for all she has suffered? The seeds of resilience have been planted, but the storm is not over. Though her days were long and filled with struggle, Amara was not entirely alone. One woman in particular remained a lifeline. Her friend, Marcia. Marcia was another Jamaican immigrant, a fiery woman with quick wit and eyes that missed nothing. She worked in a small beauty salon, but her true gift was encouragement. She often said, "Amara, you're stronger than you think. Don't let that man mash your spirit." On nights when Amara thought she couldn't bear the weight, Marcia would appear at her door with a hot meal or a listening ear. She never judged, never pitied. She simply reminded Amara that she was still seen, still valued. "God not done with you yet?" Marcia would say, patting Amara's hand. "One day, David gon' see what he throw away, and it gon' burn him." Amara clung to those words even when her faith wavered. While Amara pieced together survival, David was stepping deeper into a world built on illusions. His co-workers, men who admired his ambition but cared little for his integrity, fed his ego at every turn. "Man, you did the right thing," one of them told him over drinks. "Why stay tied down to some housewife when you've got options? You're meant for more." Another chimed in, "Exactly, family life's a trap. Sabrina's a woman who knows how to treat a man. Stick with her and you'll rise faster." Their words poisoned David's mind, reinforcing every selfish desire he already nurtured. They made him feel justified, even noble, in abandoning Amara and Nathaniel. And Sabrina? She played her role with mastery. Sabrina was more than just beautiful. She was cunning. She had studied David from the beginning, learning his weaknesses like a musician learns notes. "You're so brilliant, David," she would purr, her hand trailing across his arm. "I don't know why people don't see it. You're meant for greatness." David basked in her praise, his chest swelling. Where Amara had once reminded him of humility, of responsibilities, Sabrina whispered only flattery. She fed his ego like a starving man at a feast. "You shouldn't waste your energy on people who don't believe in you," she said one night, her voice dripping honey. "Why tie yourself down to someone who doesn't understand your vision? With me, you can fly." David, blind to her manipulations, believed every word. Slowly, Sabrina began to isolate him. She suggested he spend less time with old friends who questioned his choices. She ridiculed his coworkers if they dared to mention Amara. "They're jealous of you," she would say. "They don't want to see you rise. But me, I'll never hold you back." Piece by piece, she built a world where David's only source of validation was her, and he surrendered willingly. He stopped calling relatives. He avoided the church where people whispered about his betrayal. He even ignored messages from Marcia, who tried once to confront him for Amara's sake. "David," Marcia told him sharply when she caught him outside a cafe, "you shamed a whole community. How could you throw away your wife and baby?" David's face hardened. "Stay out of my business, Marcia. Amara's strong. She'll survive." "Survive?" Marcia spat, fury in her voice. "Dat woman build ya, stand by ya, and ya treat her like trash? Don't tink God sleep, David. Don't tink him blind." But he only walked away, Sabrina's hand clutching his arm like chains. Behind closed doors, Sabrina's sweetness sometimes turned sharp. She demanded expensive gifts, insisted they dine at the best restaurants, and scoffed when David hesitated. "You want to be successful, don't you?" she'd sneer. "Then act like it. A man of your stature doesn't count pennies." David, desperate to keep her approval, spent beyond his means. Credit cards piled up, debts mounted, but Sabrina's praise, though fleeting, kept him chasing more. And yet, whenever cracks appeared in his confidence, she was there to soothe him, to whisper that he was destined for greatness if only he stayed with her. Back in her modest apartment, Amara knew little of David's unraveling. She had no time to track his descent. Her days were consumed with survival. But Marcia kept her informed in bits. "That woman milking him dry," Marcia said one evening over tea. "Mark my words, David dig in his own grave." Amara sighed, rocking Nathaniel gently. "Then let him dig, Marcia. My concern is here." She kissed her son's forehead, choosing not to dwell on bitterness. Still, in the quiet hours of night, when Nathaniel was asleep, sorrow pressed against her chest. She couldn't stop the questions. Why wasn't I enough? Why didn't he see me? But each morning she rose again. Resilience became her shield, her quiet rebellion against despair. Meanwhile, David's life, though glittering on the surface, was beginning to rot from within. His co-workers, once so supportive, started whispering about his recklessness. Sabrina, though still affectionate in public, grew more controlling behind closed doors. "You're nothing without me," she hissed one night after a bitter argument. "Don't forget that." And David, so puffed up with pride, believed her. He didn't realize that the woman he clung to was the very one pulling him toward ruin. The audience sees it clearly. The trap is tightening. The man who thought he was gaining freedom is shackling himself deeper into bondage. Amara, meanwhile, was climbing in quiet dignity. She had managed to save enough to enroll in night classes, determined to build a better future for Nathaniel. While David chased illusions, she invested in resilience. Her community admired her. Her church lifted her in prayer. Nathaniel grew healthy, loved, and strong. The contrast was stark. One parent abandoning integrity for vanity, the other building strength from ashes. And though the paths seemed separate now, they were destined to collide again. The suspense builds like a tightening drumbeat. The audience knows David cannot keep running. Sabrina cannot keep the mask on forever. And when the reckoning comes, the downfall will be catastrophic. The day had been especially hard. Amara's feet throbbed from hours of standing at the cafe, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes after her cleaning shift. She had just enough energy to rock Nathaniel to sleep before collapsing onto the couch. But when she opened her mailbox, a new letter awaited her, a notice that her rent was increasing. Her knees buckled as she sank to the floor, the paper fluttering from her hand. Tears burst forth, unstoppable, hot rivers streaming down her cheeks. She pressed her palms to her face, the sound of her sobs filling the small apartment. "Why, Lord," she cried, "why must I fight every day just to keep my head above water? Haven't I suffered enough?" Her cries startled Nathaniel awake. From his crib, the baby whimpered, then began to cry too, as if echoing her pain. Amara stumbled toward him, scooping him into her trembling arms. She buried her face in his little chest, her tears soaking his onesie. But then, something remarkable happened. Nathaniel, barely a toddler, lifted his tiny hand and brushed it clumsily against her cheek. His warm fingers smeared her tears, his innocent eyes looking into hers as if to say, "Don't give up, Mommy." Her sobs quieted. She kissed his hand, whispering through her brokenness, "You're right, my love. I can't fall apart. Not while you need me. You are my strength." That night, though sorrow had bent her low, hope rose again. The audience feels the sting of her suffering, but also the awe of her resilience. A few weeks later, Amara's path crossed, David's for the first time since the night he cast her out. It was at a local grocery store, of all places. Amara had just finished shopping. Nathaniel balanced on her hip when she spotted him near the wine aisle. He wore a sharp suit, his arm draped casually around Sabrina, who laughed at something he whispered in her ear. Amara's stomach tightened. She hadn't wanted this confrontation, but her feet carried her forward. "David," she called softly. He turned, his smile fading when he saw her. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, but Sabrina's presence hardened him. "What do you want, Amara?" he said coldly, loud enough for others nearby to hear. Amara swallowed her pride. "We need to talk about Nathaniel." Sabrina smirked, leaning closer to David. "Oh, so this is the famous wife?" She sneered. "I see why you traded up." Heat rushed to Amara's cheeks, but she held her ground. "David, he's your son. He deserves to know his father. Can't you at least—" But David cut her off with a laugh. "Look around you, Amara. Do you see me struggling like you? Do you see me begging? I've moved on. You should too. Stop embarrassing yourself." His words rang through the store, drawing curious stares. Amara felt the weight of humiliation crush her chest. Her eyes burning with tears, she refused to shed in front of him. "Embarrassing?" she whispered. "David, the only shame here is yours." But David turned away, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, as though she were nothing but a nuisance. Sabrina laughed again, the sound like nails on glass, and they walked away without looking back. The audience burns with fury. A good woman humiliated in public, scorned while clutching the child of the man who betrayed her. The injustice is unbearable, yet beneath the cruelty the cracks were showing. The audience saw what David could not. His suit was sharp, yes, but his eyes were tired, his laughter forced. The credit cards Sabrina insisted he use were stacking bills he couldn't pay. His so-called friends were whispering behind his back, mocking the way he catered to her demands. And Sabrina? Even in that brief encounter, her smirk revealed her true nature. She wasn't beside David out of love. She was beside him out of convenience, milking him for everything he could offer. Karma was patient, invisible but already moving. One day soon, David would reap the harvest of his choices. And when that day came, the same woman he had humiliated, abandoned, and cast aside would rise from the ashes of her suffering. The years slipped by like pages turning in a book. What once felt like endless nights of tears and worry eventually gave way to mornings filled with hope. Amara had never remarried. Suitors came and went, neighbors whispered, friends encouraged her, but her heart stayed steady. She wasn't bitter, but she had poured every ounce of her love into raising Nathaniel. He had been her anchor in the storm, and now, watching him grow into a strong, determined young man, she knew her sacrifices had not been in vain. They lived in a modest apartment near the heart of their Jamaican American community. The building wasn't grand, but it pulsed with life. On Sundays, the hallway echoed with the sound of gospel music spilling from radios. On weeknights, the smell of jerk chicken, curry goat, and fried plantains wafted from neighbors' kitchens. Amara had risen from cleaning jobs to a stable position at a local school cafeteria. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the children adored her, her warmth, her laughter, the way she slipped extra portions to the hungrier ones. Parents in the community often said, "Miss Amara? She's the heart of this school." Nathaniel excelled at his studies. Teachers described him as disciplined, focused, and kind. While other teenagers sought out mischief, Nathaniel poured himself into books, sports, and helping his mother. He was tall now, his shoulders broad, his face carrying traces of both Amara's warmth and David's sharpness. He was the kind of son who made people stop and say, "That boy's going places." On the day he received a scholarship letter from a prestigious university, Amara wept tears of joy. Holding the envelope, she whispered, "See, my son, God never leaves his children. What your father meant for harm, the Lord has turned for good." The audience feels a swell of pride. Amara has endured. Nathaniel is thriving. Their life is not flashy, but it glows with dignity. But not far away, another life told a very different story. David had once walked through the world with the confidence of a king. His suits were sharp, his car sleek, his home expansive. At social gatherings, he was the man others admired, the one with the beautiful mistress on his arm and the air of success in every step. But time has a way of peeling back illusions. Sabrina, the woman who had dazzled him, was no longer the sweet escape she once seemed. Her demands grew sharper over the years. New jewelry, exotic vacations, designer clothes. David, once flush with business profits, found himself dipping into loans, then credit, then favors from friends. At first no one noticed. He still strutted through offices, still boasted about his ventures. But behind closed doors, bills piled up. Investment deals soured. Competitors outpaced him. His pride wouldn't allow him to admit weakness, so he doubled down, taking risks that only worsened his position. Sabrina didn't help. She drained him. She fed his ego when it suited her, then tore it down when he failed to meet her insatiable appetite for more. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't looking, her eyes flickered with boredom. She had no loyalty to him, only to what he could provide. And his so-called friends? The ones who had once toasted his freedom from his wife and baby? They began to whisper behind his back. They mocked the way Sabrina controlled him, the way his business was losing ground. One by one, they drifted away, seeking fresher successes to latch onto. David began to feel the sting of loneliness. He would sit in his expansive living room, still larger than Amara's apartment but emptier than any space should be, and feel a silence that gnawed at him. One evening, as David poured himself a glass of whiskey, he noticed a letter on his desk. It was from the bank. His hand trembled as he read it. Overdue notices, threats of repossession. He muttered, "It's just a phase. One big deal and I'll bounce back." But deep down, he knew. The deals were no longer coming. His reputation was fraying. Investors no longer trusted him. That night, as Sabrina prepared to go out with friends, David tried to speak to her. "Babe, maybe we should cut back. Just for a little while. Things are tight right now." Sabrina froze, one hand on her diamond necklace. Then she laughed. "Cut back? David, darling, you promised me a life, not excuses. If you can't deliver, maybe I need a man who can." The word struck like a dagger. For the first time, David saw her clearly. Not as a partner, not as love, but as a leech clinging to his fading glow. As months passed, the pressure wore on him. His once erect posture slumped. His laughter grew hollow. He woke in the night drenched in sweat, his heart pounding erratically. At first, he dismissed it. Too much stress, too much whiskey. But the episodes grew more frequent. A visit to the doctor confirmed what he feared. His health was deteriorating. Years of stress, poor habits, and unchecked pride were exacting their toll. Still, he refused to slow down. Pride would not let him. Instead, he masked his decline with bravado, insisting to anyone who would listen that he was just one deal away from turning it all around. But behind the mask, his world crumbled. While David's nights grew darker, Amara's days shone brighter. Nathaniel, now in university, excelled not only academically but also as a leader. Professors praised his sharp mind. Peers respected his humility. He carried himself with quiet confidence, always remembering the sacrifices his mother made. One evening, at a community event, Nathaniel gave a short speech, thanking the neighborhood for supporting him and his mother. His words, filled with gratitude and determination, left many in tears. Amara, sitting in the audience, could barely contain her pride. She saw in her son everything she had hoped for, and more. Neighbors approached her afterward, saying, "Miss Amara, you've raised a fine young man. You must be so proud." And she was, beyond words. Meanwhile, David drove home from a failed business meeting. His tie loosened, his car eerily quiet without Sabrina, who had chosen to spend the evening elsewhere. His phone buzzed with unpaid bill reminders. His stomach twisted with dread. 2 lives, 2 paths. One built on sacrifice, faith, and love. The other on pride, greed, and betrayal. And though David couldn't yet see it, the scales of justice were tipping. One night, David sat alone at the edge of his grand king-sized bed. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the city skyline through the window. Sabrina hadn't come home yet. She had texted earlier, "Out with friends, don't wait up." He glanced at the clock. Midnight, then 1, then 2. David poured another glass of whiskey, but it didn't drown the gnawing emptiness. Once he had laughed at the idea of family dinners, of quiet evenings with Amara and their baby. He had called it small life. Now, in the silence of his penthouse, he wondered if that small life had been the very thing he needed. But pride kept the thought buried. He gritted his teeth, muttering, "I made the right choice. I had to. I deserve more." Yet even as he said it, his chest tightened with doubt. While David sank deeper into his shadows, Nathaniel's star only shone brighter. He had recently received recognition at his university for an essay on justice and moral responsibility. The local paper even published his photograph, his sharp features and confident gaze making the community beam with pride. Amara clipped the article and placed it in a scrapbook she had kept since his first day of kindergarten. As she traced her fingers over the picture, her heart swelled. "You'll be a man of integrity, Nathaniel. You'll never repeat the mistakes of the past." Neighbors passed the paper around, shaking their heads. Some remembered the night David had thrown Amara out, baby in her arms. And now, years later, that same child was becoming a beacon of hope. David eventually noticed the article, too. A colleague casually dropped it on his desk. "Isn't this your boy?" he asked. David stiffened, his throat dry. He hadn't seen Nathaniel in years. The boy's eyes in the picture pierced him, strong, intelligent, nothing like the helpless baby he had discarded. David forced a laugh, brushing it off. "Oh, him? Just a kid. I don't keep in touch." But inside, something shifted. Guilt, envy, fear. The past, he thought, buried, was clawing its way back. And soon he would no longer be able to ignore it. The audience feels the storm brewing. David's empire is a house of cards, trembling. And in the distance, justice sharpens its blade. The first real sign came when David returned home late one night, weary from another failed business meeting. He found Sabrina sprawled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. Her nails, painted crimson, tapped against the glass in quick succession. "Where's dinner?" he asked, loosening his tie. She didn't even glance up. "I ordered takeout. You can grab some if you want." David blinked. Years ago, she had greeted him with wide eyes and sultry smiles. Now, she barely looked at him. He felt invisible. "Babe, things are tight right now." he began carefully. Maybe we need to cut back a little, just for a while. Sabrina's eyes finally flickered to him, sharp as glass. Cut back on me? She set her phone down, her lips curling. David, I didn't leave everything behind to live like some bargain basement housewife. You promised me a life, so deliver it. Her words stung. He remembered Amara, who had stretched pennies into meals, who had gone without so their baby could have diapers. And here was Sabrina, demanding, unyielding, draining. But he said nothing. Pride chained his tongue. David's friends began to scatter when his fortunes slipped. Once his phone buzzed nonstop with invitations to parties, golf games, and networking events. Now the silence was deafening. At a cocktail party, one of his old colleagues smirked as David approached. Hey man, you still chasing those big deals? Heard you've had some setbacks. Laughter rippled in the group. David forced a smile, his jaw tight. Just a rough patch. Nothing I can't handle. But the whispers spread. He's slipping. He's broke. Sabrina's bleeding him dry. By the end of the evening, David found himself standing alone in the corner, his drink warm and untouched. The men who once toasted him as a success story now turned their backs. One night, David left a late meeting and decided to surprise Sabrina at home. But as he approached the building, his gut twisted. Parked outside was a sleek car he didn't recognize. Inside, laughter floated from the living room. A man's laughter. David froze. The scene burned into him. Sabrina curled on the couch with another man, her hand grazing his chest, her voice soft with flirtation. For a moment, rage surged. He wanted to storm in, to shout, to demand answers, but his pride crumbled beneath a heavier truth. He had no right to be surprised. Sabrina was never loyal. She had only been loyal to what he could give her. He turned away, the laughter chasing him into the night. Soon after, the bank moved in. David's debts had piled too high, and there was no saving the house. One morning, as neighbors watched, movers carried out his furniture. His once proud luxury car was towed from the driveway. A notice of repossession flapped on the door in the wind. David stood outside trying to maintain composure, but the stares burned into him. Some pitied him. Others smirked, remembering his arrogance. He could almost hear their thoughts. So this is what became of him. Humiliation wrapped around him like a noose. His business partners withdrew. Clients pulled contracts. The last deal he had pinned his hopes on fell through spectacularly. The newspapers ran a quiet story. Local entrepreneur declares bankruptcy. For David, it was louder than thunder. He sat in an empty office, staring at the framed certificates on the wall. They looked meaningless now. Paper relics of a man who once thought himself untouchable. His phone buzzed. A message from Sabrina. Don't look for me. I'm done. That was the final blow. She hadn't just drained him. She had abandoned him when he had nothing left to give. That night, David walked through the streets, his steps heavy. He passed a small cafe, laughter spilling from within. Through the window he saw a young family, mother, father, baby, sharing a simple meal. His chest tightened. That could have been him. That should have been him. He had once held that life in his hands, but he had thrown it away for a woman who cared nothing for him. The image seared into his soul. He whispered bitterly, I traded love for emptiness. For the first time in years, his arrogance gave way to tears. But fate wasn't done. Weeks of stress, nights of heavy drinking, and years of pride finally caught up. One evening, while walking home from a failed attempt to beg an old acquaintance for money, David's chest seized. Pain shot through his arm. His vision blurred. He collapsed on the sidewalk, strangers rushing to his aid. In the hospital, the diagnosis came clear. His heart was failing. Lying in the sterile white bed, IV lines in his arm, David stared at the ceiling. The once proud man was now reduced to fragility, dependent on nurses to bring him water. The irony was cruel. He had spent his life chasing strength, power, and independence only to end up helpless and alone. Discharged with warnings he couldn't afford to ignore, David returned not to a mansion but to a cramped apartment provided by a charity. The walls were bare, the silence suffocating. No Sabrina, no friends, no business, only regret. Night after night, he replayed the choices that had led him here. The image of Amara's tear-streaked face the night he cast her out haunted him. Nathaniel's baby cries echoed in his memory. For years he had convinced himself he was justified, that he deserved more, that they were holding him back. But now, lying alone in a bed too large for one broken man, the truth thundered in his chest. He hadn't been chasing success. He had been running from love, and now he had nothing left. The audience leans forward. David's downfall is complete, financially ruined, publicly humiliated, abandoned, and broken in health. But the story isn't over, because fate still has one last twist waiting for him. And it involves the very people he once cast aside. David's nights grew longer than his days. Sleep refused to come. When he did manage to drift off, nightmares pulled him under. Amara's face drenched in tears, the echo of a baby's cry, Sabrina's laughter ringing with cruelty. He would wake drenched in sweat, gasping for air, his hand clutching his chest. The silence of his apartment mocked him. He had traded family warmth for empty luxury, and now even that luxury was gone. Sometimes he turned on the TV just to fill the void. He would watch happy families in sitcoms, commercials where fathers played with their children. He tried to laugh, but the sound stuck in his throat. Loneliness was louder than any noise. The little money he had trickled away fast. Hospital bills, rent, cheap meals. Once he had dined on fine steaks and vintage wines. Now he bought cans of soup, counting change at the register, while the cashier gave him a pitying glance. He avoided looking at her ashamed. The refrigerator hummed in the corner of his apartment, half empty, holding nothing more than eggs, milk, and a few wilted vegetables. David opened it one night and stared blankly, the cold light illuminating his hollow face. He whispered to himself, "Is this what I've become?" For the first time in years he admitted it. He was poor. But worse than that, he was unloved. To escape the crushing silence, David began rummaging through old boxes he had carried from place to place. Inside, he found fragments of his past life, papers from old deals, photos of parties, receipts from extravagant trips. At the very bottom, beneath yellowed folders, he discovered a photograph. It was Amara. She was smiling in the picture, Nathaniel in her arms, still just a baby, swaddled in a blue blanket. David froze. His breath hitched as he traced her face with his trembling finger. He remembered the day that photo was taken. Amara had cooked a big Jamaican meal: oxtail stew, rice and peas, fried plantains. The apartment had smelled of spices, the air alive with music and laughter. He had been there, holding his son for the first time, marveling at the tiny fingers clutching his own. How had he thrown it away? The photo shook in his hand as guilt burned hot in his chest. Everywhere he went, reminders of what he'd lost haunted him. On the subway, he saw a young man give up his seat for his mother. David's eyes stung as he thought of Nathaniel. Was he that kind of son now? Did he remember his father at all? At the market, he saw a man joking with his wife while they shopped together. The sight stabbed him with envy. Amara had once joked with him like that, her laughter rich and warm. Now her laughter belonged to another world, a world he had exiled himself from. One evening, David worked up the courage to call an old friend, a man he had once celebrated victories with. "Hey, it's David," he began, his voice cautious. "I was wondering if you could help me out. Things have been rough." A pause, then a cold chuckle. "David, man, everyone warned you. You had a good thing, and you tossed it for a fling. Now you want sympathy? I've got my own problems. Don't call me again." The line went dead. David stared at his phone, the words slicing deeper than any blade. Even his oldest friends had abandoned him. The next morning, his chest pain returned, sharper, deeper. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor, clutching at his ribs. For a terrifying moment, he thought he might not get up again. When he finally staggered to his feet, he realized the truth. He wasn't just broken alone. He was dying, and no one would notice. No one would care. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one thought refused to leave him: Amara. Where was she now? Did she ever think of him? And Nathaniel? What kind of man had his son become? Shame drowned him. He couldn't imagine facing them. Yet a strange pull tugged at him. Deep down, he knew his story with them wasn't finished. Karma had stripped him bare. The only thing left was the reckoning. The years had carved their marks on both lives, but destiny has a way of weaving paths together at the most unexpected moment. It was a Saturday morning. The air buzzed with chatter at a modest community center in Brooklyn. Tables lined with homemade food, jerk chicken, patties, steamed fish, rice and peas, filled the hall. The sweet rhythm of reggae drifted from the speakers. Children darted between tables, their laughter mixing with the hum of adults catching up on the week. At the center of it all was Amara. Her head was wrapped in a vibrant scarf of gold and green. She moved with a calm dignity that drew eyes without her trying. People greeted her warmly. "Miss Amara, good morning." And she responded with grace. She wasn't rich, but she was respected. She had built a name in her community as a woman of faith, resilience, and generosity. Beside her stood Nathaniel, now in his mid-20s, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed neatly in a tailored suit. He had inherited his mother's warmth but carried himself with a confidence that came from success. Nathaniel was a young attorney known for defending people who had no voice. And though he was admired in his own right, anyone who knew him would say he was his mother's son first. The two worked together that morning, serving food and chatting with neighbors. Their bond was visible in the small things. The way Nathaniel carried trays before Amara could lift them. The way Amara smiled with quiet pride whenever someone complimented her son. And then, through the doors, walked David. He looked nothing like the man Amara once knew. His once tall posture was bent, his expensive suits replaced by an ill-fitting jacket. His cheeks were hollow, his hair streaked gray far earlier than it should have been. His eyes darted nervously, as though he didn't belong. When he spotted Amara across the room, he froze. For a long moment, he stood rooted, his breath shallow. The woman he had discarded like nothing now stood radiant, surrounded by respect, warmth, and family. She looked stronger, happier, complete without him. And then his eyes landed on Nathaniel. The boy he had last seen bundled in Amara's arms was now a man, tall, confident, protective. David's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but guilt closed his throat. Amara felt the shift in the room before she saw him. Conversations slowed, whispers floated. "Isn't that—" When her eyes finally met David's, the air seemed to freeze. Memories rushed back. The night she stood on the street clutching her baby, rain soaking her tears. The years of struggle, the countless prayers whispered into her pillow, but also the triumphs, the milestones. Nathaniel's first steps, his graduation, his victories in court. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. She refused to let the past shake the dignity she had fought for. "Mom," Nathaniel noticed her stillness. He followed her gaze, and his expression hardened instantly. "Is that—" Amara nodded slowly. With hesitant steps, David moved closer. Each shuffle felt like a mile. He could feel eyes on him, judging, remembering his past cruelty. His throat ached as he whispered, "Amara." Her name left his lips cracked and broken, nothing like the arrogant voice of years past. "Amara, please." Nathaniel stepped forward, his tall frame forming a wall between his mother and the man who had abandoned them. His voice was sharp. "You've got a lot of nerve showing up here." David swallowed, his eyes glistening. I just wanted to see her, just to say I'm sorry." The hall fell quiet. Even the music seemed distant. David's voice cracked as he spoke louder, desperation spilling. "I was a fool. I thought I was gaining the world, but I lost everything. The business, gone. Sabrina, gone. My friends, gone. I'm sick, Amara. The doctors say—" His voice trailed, his chest shuddering. He dropped to his knees in front of them. Gasps filled the room. "Please, I don't deserve forgiveness, I know that. But I beg you, just a chance to say I'm sorry. I can't carry this anymore." Amara stood still, her hands folded, eyes fixed on the man who once humiliated her. Inside, a storm raged, anger, sorrow, disbelief. She remembered nights she had begged him to listen. She remembered clutching her baby in the cold, searching for shelter. And yet, she also remembered the years of healing, the strength she had found, the joy Nathaniel brought her. Her silence was more powerful than words. Nathaniel couldn't contain himself. His fists clenched, his jaw tight. "You threw my mother into the streets. You left me as a baby with nothing. And now you come crawling back? You think an apology fixes that?" His voice shook the hall. David bowed his head. "No, nothing can fix it. I know that. But please, let me say it anyway." Nathaniel's eyes burned with anger. But beneath it all was something else. A son's deep wound. The crowd waited. Everyone leaned in, hearts pounding. Would Amara lash out? Would she spit the bitterness she had every right to feel? Instead, Amara took a slow breath. Her voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "David, you took everything from me. You humiliated me, left me with a baby and no home. For years, I cried, asking God why. But he showed me something. He showed me that pain doesn't break us. It shapes us." She gestured toward Nathaniel. "This is my son, strong, kind, successful. He is my victory, not you, not your betrayal. My God turned my tears into triumph." David sobbed, his body trembling. "Then please, forgive me. Even if you never take me back, even if I die alone, just say you forgive me." The room was silent, every ear straining, every heart caught between anger and mercy. Nathaniel turned to his mother, his voice hushed. "Mom, don't. He doesn't deserve it." Amara laid a hand on her son's arm, her eyes never leaving David's broken figure. "Forgiveness," she said softly, "is not about deserving. It's about freedom. I carried bitterness too long. I won't let it poison me any longer. David looked up, hope flickering in his tired eyes. I forgive you, Amara said. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steady. Not for your sake, David. For mine, for my son's, so we can live free of your shadow. Tears streamed down David's face. His shoulders sagged under the weight of grace he knew he had not earned. Nathaniel looked at his mother in awe. He didn't understand at first, but slowly he realized. Her strength wasn't in her pain. It was in her ability to rise above it. David whispered, "Thank you, thank you." The hall remained hushed, every witness changed by the moment. But the question lingered in the air. What would happen next? Would David survive long enough to rebuild even a shred of dignity? Or would this act of forgiveness be the last kindness he ever received? One thing was certain. Amara and Nathaniel's lives had already triumphed. They had survived betrayal, risen in dignity, and proved that true strength isn't in revenge, it's in resilience. The man who once cast them aside now knelt before them, broken, and the woman he had thrown away stood taller than ever. The roles had reversed completely. The room remained heavy with silence even after Amara spoke the words, "I forgive you." Some faces showed disbelief, others glistened with tears. Forgiveness was easy to talk about in sermons, but seeing it lived out in flesh and blood, it unsettled people. David stayed kneeling, his hands shaking. He couldn't even look her in the eyes. "Amara, I don't deserve that grace. I don't know why you would—" "Because I am not the same woman you left behind," she interrupted gently. "I learned that forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength. You see me standing here? You see my son? We are living proof that betrayal does not end a story. It only changes the path." Nathaniel, though still fuming, felt his chest loosen at his mother's words. For the first time he saw her not just as his protector, but as a pillar of wisdom larger than pain itself. David finally raised his eyes. They were sunken, rimmed with red, but desperate for one last chance to be heard. "I have nothing left, Amara," he whispered. "Not money, not friends, not health. I wake every night with your face in my dreams. I see our son in the streets, wondering what kind of man he became. I can't run anymore. I came here because I knew, if anyone could free me, it would be you." Nathaniel's fists clenched again. "You come crawling when you're dying, but where were you when she begged you? When she was carrying me in the cold?" David bowed his head lower, his voice breaking. "I was blind and proud and greedy, and now I am nothing." His body shook with sobs, the kind that scraped the soul raw. It wasn't the proud businessman anymore. Not even the cocky man who once thought love could be replaced by status. It was just a broken shell, crumbling before the family he betrayed. Amara stepped closer, her scarf catching the light like a crown. She didn't kneel, she didn't soften, but she did speak with steady, deliberate weight. "David, hear me. What you sow, you reap. You sowed betrayal, and now you reap emptiness. You sowed arrogance, and now you reap loneliness. But I will not sow hatred, not anymore. My harvest is different. My harvest is peace." She placed a hand on Nathaniel's shoulder. "And his harvest is strength." David's lips trembled. He wanted to speak, but no words came. His body hunched lower, almost as if the weight of her truth pressed him into the floor. People began murmuring again. Should Amara offer him help? Should Nathaniel chase him out? No one knew what would happen next. Amara's voice rose once more, calm but commanding. "David, I have forgiven you, but forgiveness does not mean we open the door to our lives again. That chapter is closed. Go in peace. Find what little time you have left, and seek God for the rest. You will not find home here, but you may still find mercy where it matters most." David's eyes widened. It was not the reunion he had dreamed of. It was not reconciliation, not a second chance at the family he lost, but it was truth. It was justice, clothed in grace. He nodded weakly. Tears fell to the floor as he whispered, "Thank you. Even if you never see me again, thank you." He rose slowly, his frame shaking, and walked toward the door. Each step was heavy, final, echoing like the closing of a book. When the door shut, Amara turned to the quiet crowd. Her gaze swept over them, her voice carrying the weight of years. "Family is not something you throw away. Love is not something you trade for status. Remember this: what glitters will fade, but what's rooted in faith and loyalty will stand forever. My son is my proof. My life is my testimony, and forgiveness, whether or not someone deserves. It is the key that sets you free. Nathaniel looked at her, pride filling his eyes. He had witnessed his mother's strength all his life, but today she had shown him something even greater. That true power is not in vengeance, but in rising above betrayal. Amara lifted her chin slightly. Let his downfall remind you, never despise what is good, never abandon what is true, because sooner or later the life you build on lies will crumble. She paused, letting the silence hold her words. Then, turning to the camera of life itself, she asked the question that pierced every listener's heart. If you were in my shoes, would you forgive? After David stumbled out of the community center, whispers filled the hall. Some expected Amara to run after him. Others thought Nathaniel might drag him back to face judgment. But Amara remained still, her hands folded in front of her, her face serene. Mom, Nathaniel said, still fuming, you should have let him rot. He doesn't deserve even your words. Amara placed her hand gently on her son's arm. Nathaniel, compassion isn't for his sake, it's for ours. If I held on to hatred, it would eat us alive. Forgiveness does not mean return. I will never walk back into chains. Nathaniel breathed deeply, his anger softening in her presence. He didn't understand all of it, but he trusted his mother's wisdom. And so the matter was closed for Amara. She had given David the only gift she still owed, him freedom from her bitterness, but nothing more. Life carried on. Months passed, then years. Nathaniel's career climbed to heights no one could have imagined. From the courtroom to the community, his reputation spread. He defended the poor with fire, often taking cases pro bono when others couldn't afford counsel. His speeches in court were so moving that even judges paused to acknowledge his conviction. Eventually, his work caught the attention of larger organizations. He was invited to conferences, awarded for excellence, and even approached by national leaders. By his early 30s, Nathaniel had become a name known well beyond Brooklyn. But he never forgot where he came from. He poured money and time back into the community center, funding scholarships for young people who couldn't afford college. He opened a small legal clinic to give free advice to single mothers fighting for custody or housing. And at every turn, he credited his mother. Everything I am, he would say in speeches, is because my mother never gave up on me. She taught me that true strength is quiet, dignified, and unbreakable. The applause always thundered, and sometimes in the back of the crowd a tired man would watch quietly. David's health declined steadily, his body weakened by years of stress, betrayal, and regret. He shuffled between cheap apartments and clinics, his once sharp suits replaced by second-hand clothes. He didn't have the courage to speak to Amara again, but he found himself watching Nathaniel from afar. He would slip into the back row of events or catch interviews on TV. One night, as Nathaniel stood on stage accepting an award for Young Humanitarian of the Year, David sat alone in his dingy apartment, eyes fixed on the screen. The host asked Nathaniel what inspired his journey. "My mother," Nathaniel said, smiling at Amara, who was seated in the front row, radiant in a green dress. "She raised me with nothing but gave me everything that mattered. She is my hero." The audience rose in a standing ovation. David clutched his chest, tears streaming down his face. The realization hit him harder than any business loss or betrayal ever had. He had abandoned not just a wife, but a son who would become greater than him in every way. It was too late to be part of Nathaniel's story, too late to reclaim what he had thrown away. One day, years later, David was rushed to the hospital. His body finally gave in to the sickness he had ignored. Alone in a sterile room, hooked to machines, he thought of one name, Amara. He asked a nurse with trembling lips, "Please, find her, tell her. I don't want to die without saying thank you again." The message reached the community center. Nathaniel was furious when he heard it. "He's had enough chances. Why should you go now, Mom?" But Amara's eyes softened. "Because sometimes, Nathaniel, compassion is the only legacy we can leave behind. If I can ease his fear in his last moments, then I've lost nothing. But he may gain peace." Reluctantly, Nathaniel accompanied her. They walked into the hospital room. David's face lit up with shock and relief, his eyes filled with tears. You came." Amara stood beside Nathaniel, tall and dignified. "We came," she corrected gently. David's voice was faint, broken. "Nathaniel, you became the man I should have been. I'm proud of you. I don't deserve to say it, but I am." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. For a long time, he said nothing. Then finally his voice came low and firm. "I didn't need your pride. I needed your presence, but I've learned to live without it. David closed his eyes, a tear sliding down his cheek. I know. I know. I'm sorry, son. Silence hung heavy in the room. Amara stepped closer. She touched David's hand lightly, not with affection, but with the compassion of one human to another. Go in peace, David. May God grant you the mercy you never gave us. For the first time in years, David's sobs stopped. His breathing steadied, and with her words still hanging in the air, he drifted into sleep. By morning, he was gone. At the funeral, there were no grand crowds, no powerful business associates, no lavish displays, just a handful of strangers, the priest and, at the very back, Amara and Nathaniel. They didn't come to honor him as a husband or father. They came to close the chapter with dignity. As the casket lowered, Amara whispered to her son, "We are not here because of what he gave us. We are here because of what we gave ourselves. Freedom from hate, that is our victory." Nathaniel nodded, finally understanding fully. His father's downfall was not their burden. Their triumph was their own. That evening, Nathaniel stood on the steps of the community center, overlooking the city lights. His voice was steady as he turned to the small crowd gathered for a weekly meeting. My father lived for ambition and lust. He lost everything. My mother lived for love, loyalty, and dignity. She gained everything that matters. If there's anything I've learned, it's this. The glitter of the world fades fast, but love, that endures. The audience grew still, reflecting. Then Nathaniel posed the question that sparked murmurs and debate long into the night. When temptation comes, status, lust, greed, what will you choose? The fleeting shine or the love that lasts? The moral was clear and unforgettable. The hall had grown silent again. The whispers faded. The memory of David kneeling, of Amara standing tall, of Nathaniel burning with both anger and pride, it all lingered like smoke in the air. But beyond the pain and the confrontation, beyond the tears and the regret, there was something far greater, the lesson. Because if we strip away all the drama, all the betrayal, the years of suffering, the downfall, what remains is a truth that every one of us must face. What do we value most in this life? David valued ambition. He valued lust. He valued the shine of status and the thrill of power. And for a moment, it looked like he had everything. The house, the business, the woman who flattered his pride. But one by one, those things slipped through his fingers, until all he had left was regret. Amara valued love. She valued loyalty. She valued dignity, the quiet kind that doesn't shout but endures. And even when everything was stripped from her, she never lost what mattered most. She walked through fire and came out unburned. She raised her son into a man who stood taller than any fortune could buy. And Nathaniel, he was the living proof. A child once left with nothing but his mother's arms, who grew into a man respected, admired, victorious, not because of what he inherited, but because of the values planted deep in him. So let me ask you right now, what kind of legacy are you building? If your life were measured not by your possessions, but by your relationships, what would remain? If tomorrow the status, the glitter, the applause, all of it disappeared, would you still have something real? That's the question David never asked himself until it was too late. Don't make his mistake. And now, I want to turn to you, the one watching this story unfold. If you were Amara standing in that hall, face to face with the man who betrayed you, would you forgive? Would you offer compassion, even if he didn't deserve it? Or would you turn away, holding on to the justice of your anger? There's no easy answer. Some of you will say, yes, forgive. It's freedom. Others will say, no, never. Some betrayals cannot be excused. And that's the beauty of this space. We want to hear your heart, your opinion, your truth. So tell us in the comments below, would you forgive or would you turn your back forever? Why? Your thoughts might just be the perspective someone else needs to hear. Final moral. But whether you choose forgiveness or not, here is the moral that shines through Amara's life. Love is stronger than lust. Dignity outlives ambition. Loyalty is worth more than wealth. Everything else fades. Money goes, beauty fades, ambition burns out. But love endures. So guard it, cherish it, don't trade it for anything. And if this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, don't keep it to yourself. Share your answer in the comments. Would you forgive? Hit the like button so more people can find this story. And subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you stories that don't just entertain. They remind us of the values that matter most. Stories of betrayal and redemption, of heartbreak and healing, of choices and consequences. Stories that may just change the way you see your own life. Remember this, David's downfall isn't just his story, it's a warning. Amara's triumph isn't just her story, it's an invitation. Nathaniel's success isn't just his story, it's a challenge. Which story will yours be?